Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Dr. Moe ElHussini. Welcome to episode 4 of Back2Basics on the Business Edge, brought to you by Feliciano School of Business at Montclair State University. Here at Back2Basics, myself and Dr. Elias discuss questions and issues facing business practitioners. Today's episode is a continuation of our discussion, which focuses on decoding the enigma of motivation, understanding what we mean by motivation and how to better apply it in our relationships. Welcome, George, to the podcast.
Thanks, Mo, and great opening there. Last time we talked about how we can get and stay personally motivated. Where shall we go from here?
I think, we talked about personally, and we talked a little bit, I think, about motivating the employees, right? I think we covered those 2 points last time. And you know what? You just reminded me, for those of you listening who did not listen to episode 3, I highly recommend that you guys do listen to it. George shared during the podcast a personal experience related to personal motivation. I think it was quite inspirational to myself. So those of you who did not listen to it, I think you would enjoy listening to it. But what do you think, George? How about if we go now into the topic of motivating customers? So we do that?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I think that a lot of businesses struggle with motivating their customers, and and I think it's something that a lot of folks can really relate to, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's do that. Yeah, let's talk about motivating customers. And why don't you go ahead? You start with your thoughts. What were you thinking about that?
Well, first, let me just give you kind of my background. So I have over 20 years, in the defense industry, and that's a regulated industry. And when us as a defense contractor are trying to get a government customer to buy from us, there's rules and regulations in the way that you do that. And those rules and regulations are intended to provide a level playing ground for defense contractors and folks that are approaching the government to sell things. And there's good reasons for that, right? As U.S. taxpayers, you want the government to be responsible with what they spend, right? But even then, I don't want to focus on that exactly, because that's rules and regulations, and that can be a discussion for another day. But what we're talking about here is how to motivate customers, even if they're business to business or consumer or or someone else, right? And I really think that folks, people that are buying, whether they're organizations or not, number one is you have to form a relationship. And ideally it would be positive, but even a negative relationship is better than no relationship whatsoever. And my perspective is, even in a negative relationship, there are opportunities to turn that around and even make a better positive experience for your customers. I think customers sometimes are forgiving and understand that things don't always happen right. But if you want to keep that customer, it's your obligation to make it right. And sometimes you can even get kudos from them. They recognize that you went the extra mile to help them out in a bad scenario.
Yeah, I agree with you, George. I agree with you. And I want to mention 2 things. First, kind of like to restate what you said, because I agree with you 100%. The way I see it, what I take out of what you said about your job experiences is that even if, for example, I come to you with a project, so to speak, and I meet all the requirements that you're looking for, if I don't show the positive energy that motivates you or that fuels you, energizes you to work with me, you may go with another bid, someone else that meets all the requirements, right? So it's not necessarily that, yes, I meet all what's expected on paper, then I'm good to go, right? There is that emotional human part that we're going to talk about later. And the other part about relationships, I also see it, I agree with you again. The way I see it, I think of relationships are kind of like bank accounts. And the time that you put into it is the currency. So you think about which accounts, which relationships are you investing in, and vice versa, meaning exactly like you said, a client or a customer could be unforgiving for one simple reason. If you waste that time that they're investing into a relationship, it's time wasted they could have spent with someone else, one way to look at it, right? So you're right, there's a lot of reasons that could make the customer or the client very critical or having very high expectations when they sit with someone during a transaction, whatever it may be. And that's why the A game has to be on, and you do have to be ready to motivate properly that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the relationship part is fundamental to think about it. How do you want to turn your relationship? First of all, form one, because even if you have the better product, if the customer doesn't know about the product or doesn't even know that you exist, they're not going to choose you. So just on a fundamental level, and I think that there's a lot of analogies on personal relationships and meeting people that you can use those analogies on how you should interact with customers. And I think in that relationship, one of the things that you need to do is to suppress your need at times to give them the hard sell on you or your product. And one of the things you might want to do first is listen to your customer. I know that sounds maybe even a little easy, but people love to be listened to. And, you know, in the act of listening, they actually believe that you want to know about them. And there's a fundamental baseline human reaction when somebody's interested in you, that you see them in a positive light.
Yeah, and actually, you know what? To put it bluntly, shut up and listen, and don't listen to talk, but listen to actually connect with what the customer is saying, process what they're saying, identify with them, and more importantly, give them the chance to identify and connect with you, because that connection is what's going to lead to everything else that comes afterwards. So absolutely, people, like you said, love to be heard, love to express their opinions, their thoughts. And this is the great opportunity, one way of what you said earlier, to turn objections into something positive is to do that, listen, and use that opportunity to transform whatever negativity they have in their mind into something positive. Because you know what? Most of the time, it could very well be something based upon perceptions or false assumptions, that this would give you the opportunity to hear them out and then correct and present them with the true reality of the situation versus the false perception.
You know, Mo, I couldn't help but really think that, you know, informing that relationship and listening to the customer, you know, there's a level of empathy that you need to bring about. You know, if you have feelings for your customer, you know, truly in a business sense, right, and you're able to empathize, understand their position, relate to the customer, you know, you can put yourself in their shoes. I think that really starts getting you down the road to building trust, because I really believe that oftentimes, you know, that chemistry you have with another person, it can often be very mutual. And if you're feeling close to your customer, you're empathizing with them, and you're feeling that, I think you're one step closer to having a trusting relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one key thing I always remember when I try to apply what you just said is not to rush. Do not try to rush that, like you said, that hard sale. Take the time, listen, hear them out, build that relationship, be empathetic to what they're saying, and take it from there very, very, very slowly. Give that relationship a chance to what's the word I'm looking for? To grow, to be nourished, right before you move on to the actual business part of the transaction.
Yeah, and like,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, and the speed that happens at is different in different situations, and it depends on what you're selling. It's really all really relative. But when people feel rushed, they start having anxiety about what's going on there, those are negative emotions that you're causing in your customer. And even if you corner them and force them to in some way or trick them into buying something, listen, I've seen those purchases come right back and get returned later on, or
exactly.
Or maybe that's the last sale you ever make to that individual because it was a negative experience.
Yeah, because what you're doing is you're trying to make it an impulsive buy, but they're not buying chewing gum. I mean, they're going to turn around after they actually process what they did, and they're going to come back and, like you said, they're going to return it, cancel it, whatever it is that you did, but it'll just be not worth the time that you put into it. You will not get what you want out of it. Yeah.
And it's funny because if people talk, so even if you're of the mindset, well, all sales are final, don't do that, I'm not going to take it back. You knew what to do. You know what? People talk and your reputation moves like wildfire, especially negative, right? So, a negative relationship with a customer, turns into a dozen negative relationships.
Yes, I agree 100%. And I think the underlying aspect which keeps coming to my mind through everything that we just talked about up until now is the emotional angle to any relationship, right? Getting that positive energy from the customer, getting that agreement or connection or identifying both ways between the customer and yourself has to do with connecting at an emotional level, right? Forgetting what you're selling, even forgetting the benefits of what you're selling, how good it is, how much it's going to save the customer's life. Just put all that stuff aside and connect with that customer, identify with them emotionally, so that other points, I think honestly, sometimes I feel like if you connect at an emotional level with someone, they'll buy from you even if you're more expensive than your competition. I think about the iPhone, right? People connect with Apple at an emotional level for many different reasons. And that's why, as expensive as it may be to buy the smartphone, an iPhone, right? They still do it because there's that connection that they've developed with the brand, right? So if you think about yourself as a personal brand, connecting with that customer at an emotional level would significantly help.
Excellent point. And one of the things you did there, and if we just go back into the language that we were using, is the prior points was more on a personal one-to-one level, but you it to brand, and I think that's a very powerful thing to think about, because customers like to choose brands or products that they relate to, or maybe they want to be represented by them. And you brought up the iPhone. I think that there's a lot of good examples. Another good example is cars. People will form a personal relationship with their cars and the brand of their car. And if they keep on having a positive relationship with that brand, there can be whether that brand represents being reliable or cool or worthy, right? And another industry that I think is has a lot of brand relationship is the clothing industry. People are literally putting clothes on them. How could they not relate to those clothes? So I think there's a lot of opportunities, especially in certain industries, to really have a powerful brand that can relate to the customers.
You know who you made me think of, George? Remember what was it? Yeah, 20, a while back, a couple of decades ago. Remember the car brand Saturn that used to exist? You remember that car? I remember they tried doing what you're saying. They tried mimicking what Harley Davidson does with their customers, right? Harley Davidson does exactly carbon copy what you just said. They have that loyalty. I don't want to say cult, use the word cult, but they have that following that people identify with that brand, and they use that motorcycle, because it's a Harley, right? And they go to gatherings, get-togethers, clubs, and so on. One of the reasons is that Harley does let the customer customize the product, but that's more consumer behavior, marketing angle. We're not going to get into that. But Saturn tried doing the same thing where they would have those picnics, get-togethers for people that own Saturns. I don't think they applied it properly because it didn't succeed as well as what Harley did. But the reason I bring it up is because I know a couple of neighbors that own Saturns, and they used to talk about the car, that it's a club, that now, it's a place where they have friendships and they know people that they connect with. And it turned into more of an emotional discussion than actually a discussion about a car when you mentioned the word Saturn.
Well, what they did was, I think, even brought it up at that you're bringing it up. Now what we're talking about is community, right?
Yeah.
And what happened there is the same thing that a lot of brands do. For instance, Mini Cooper, another car company, did something very similar, right? Like bringing up the community. I think that Starbucks, tries to bring up a community place in mind as well. There are certain brands that do that and do that well, but that's transcending the brand and actually bringing people into a community of like-minded people that want to get together and have that total brand experience, right? So there is something about that. I agree with that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. How do you think trust factors into all of this, George? So we talked about emotions, we talked about connecting, identifying. What angle, if any, does trust play in all of this?
Yeah,
the reason I ask you before you go on, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because if you remember last couple of sessions, a couple of podcasts ago, me and you had this whole discussion about trust when we were arguing our different points of view about trust versus safety. And, we're not going to get into that again. But, of course, I was right at the end. But no. But in all seriousness, how do you think trust factors into what we're talking about now?
Oh, trust is essential. And it's something that you have to build upon. And, one of the problems with trust is once it's lost, it's very difficult, sometimes impossible to get back. And it's hard to have trust if you don't execute. If you don't actually come through on your word, it's very difficult. So I'll give you an example. Past testimonials, demonstrations, they build trust. For instance, in the construction industry, it's very difficult for a given contractor to get work without having some personal connection to that new customer, right? So, for instance, I had some work done on my house, and I had seen the work. I hired the contractor that did it on my next door neighbor because they did a great job, and the testimonial was they got it on time and on budget. I'm like, wow, I'm going to hire them. And I had a similar experience, and I told other people about them as well. So I think there's ways of building trust. We talked about one of them, about listening to the customer. So if the customer believes that you heard them, right, that's one way of building trust. If the customer believes that you have best interest in mind, I'll tell you, I have honestly, and I know some people think I'm maybe nuts doing it, but I've actually listened to my customer, heard their problem set, and I've recommended that they try out my competitor because I think that in certain aspects, my competitors' product
better serve them, maybe.
would better serve them. And hopefully I don't get fired from my day job for saying that. But I truly believe that next time,
no, I agree with you. Yeah.
That customer's going to come directly to me because they know I have their best interest in mind, and I'm not just trying to make the quick sell.
No, I agree. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And you know what? Believe it or not, you're indirectly building a relationship with that competitor because they might appreciate the fact that you referred someone, and they might return the favor someday. But yeah, no, I get the point. Now, what about the point that you mentioned, George, about breaking the trust? What can you do then? Because that was the first comment you made, breaking trust. How can you break that trust?
Well, breaking trust is sometimes when you don't come through on your word, right? If you're like we talked about, like a construction, contractor. Let's say they come in, you don't show up, you're not on time, you're going over budget, you're breaking trust, right? That's a serious. So, with getting that trust back, I think requires that empathy. You need to see things from your customer's perspective, and you have to figure out what you can do to make it right.
And you know what, George? It makes me think of it in a different way as well, to link it to what we talked about last week, which is having, in the same manner that we said, you need to have clear objectives with your employees. I think you need to be clear and upfront about what you're promising the client to make sure that you can deliver on it. So I don't want to call them objectives or goals, but I guess the points that you agree on with your customer. Start recording again. So, sir, I had a glitch for a second here, but what I was talking about, George, is you made me think about how goals and objectives that we talked about with employees last week in the previous podcast, how the same idea applies now with customers. Not necessarily that you're going to walk in with goals and objectives, but the expectations have to be very clear as far as what the customer will get. And kind of like to use your example as a contractor, for example, he has to be very clear on what he is going to do so that there is no opportunity for anything that jeopardizes the trust to happen, right? You always hear about contractors that come and then, like there's something wrong with the foundation and they say, oh, we didn't agree on doing this or that. It leads to that break in trust between them and the customer. So having clear expectations from both sides, I think would matter a lot to maintain that trust. And I tend to always believe that not the customer, but us as the business people know more and know best, and are expected to take that burden on our shoulders, so that we're the ones that actually dictate what the expectations should be, and should not always assume that the customer knows everything. Because even if the customer knows everything and something goes wrong, we all know who's going to be blamed, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to keep in mind that these are not even relationships between a customer and the business. And I think that, if you think about negotiations, the person that knows more about the offer should probably step forward and put up the valuation, right? Like, you typically don't put your car or your house or something that you own up for sale and don't put some number down to start the negotiations, right? It's an uneasy aspect. So I think the person on some level in a relationship that knows more about something has the responsibility to bring that knowledge into the relationship and has some extra, how should I say, accountability in what happens, right?
Yeah.
So, I do think trust is big, but another one that I want to bring up is rapport, and building rapport with your customers. And that's something that's interesting that I've seen, but there's methods of building rapport, and one of them is talking in your customer's language. As an example, if your customer is saying something way, instead of correcting them and giving them the technical jargon or something like that, communicating with them on their level about their problem set, talking about it back. Even if they're sitting, sit with them, right? Don't necessarily stand over them. Or there's ways of body postures and relating and talking in certain ways with good eye contact that really helps on a human-to-human level build rapport and trust in relationships.
Yeah, and along those points, don't make the customer feel like they are wrong, even if they are. The way you word it and the choice of words that you use to make it less confrontational or non-confrontational at all matters a lot, I think, in the discussion and in that relationship.
So let me disagree with you a little bit on that. A little bit on that. I think that because we established that if you're offering something, you may know more about what that product can or cannot do. I think that you owe it to the customer to inform them if they're just heading down the wrong path. And I say that with respect and being careful about it, because that can ruin the relationship, especially if there's somebody that really feels as they're right. But I think that there's ways of bringing them down the path of maybe asking them, well, what if this happens? Then
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's important that even if they have a bad premise, in order to turn them around, you need to make it into your customer's idea that it's something else they want or something different. Because if a customer comes in with a particular position, moving them from that position to something else is very, very difficult. What you want is for them to move themselves. And you have to do it by deeply listening and watching out for when the right moment is to insert an idea in their mind that they may not have seen before, so they can change the picture of what they're looking for.
Yeah, and that works a lot. I mean, this works very well. I notice, I do this a lot in my coaching, sometimes, especially with people that are very high on the D, on the DISC analysis, people that are very high on the D attribute, that are very decision driven and get to the end point, and they just have very strong authoritarian personalities. I think it works well to apply what you just said. So yes, I mean that is something that I do most sometimes in dealing with some companies, especially when the owners have very high resistance to change. It's our job to find the right path, to lead them in the right direction. And sometimes, yes, it is in the way of posing the suggestion as a question, so to speak. And it makes me think of, I don't remember who said it. I'm trying to think about there was a quote I once read somewhere. I think it was something along the lines of that successful people ask better questions, and as a result, they get better answers. Something along those lines, right? I had read it somewhere, that it's all in how that you position that question and how you ask the ask.
That's a great point, and that's why you really want to listen to your customer. You want to get, and the questions you ask in that. And when I say listen to the customer, it's not like say customer speak, right? We're talking about active listening, right? Ask them questions. What if this? What if that? What do you like? What do you want? What are your long-term goals with this? Is this, depending on what the product is it disposable? How long do you need it for? If it's is this for you and your family, right? You need to be able to be insightful and ask questions and explore the entire space of what's going on. Ultimately, if you've asked them sufficient questions and you've built that rapport and you've built that trust, the customer is going to feel like choosing you is just the right thing, right? It's just the right thing for them.
I agree with you, George. I agree with you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you great. The other thing
sure.
because we brought up trust, I just want to bring up the opposite of trust, right? And the opposite is distrust, and distrust tends to be basically in a person's mind, it becomes a huge obstacle and can even be related to fear, right? I'm distrustful of this, and I really think, you need to be able to make the customer's choice easy. You need to remove obstacles, whether it's trust obstacles. You need to make whatever you're offering timely, and you need to make it affordable, because those obstacles can really change whether the customer can go with you or not, right? I mean, I'd rather have a certain type of water, but if it's not in the right spot and I'm super thirsty, I'll take just about anything.
True. Yeah, no, I agree with you, George. I agree with you. I want to ask you this because I know we're getting close to the end point. Are there any other points you want to mention related to motivation today before we wrap up, or do you want us to continue the discussion with motivation in our next podcast?
I think we can move off of motivation and maybe go towards
what do you think?
I think we can do that education, but before we totally move off of this, I just want to bring up one thing. A lot of what we discussed today is about one-on-one. I mean, you did bring up community, but we did talk a lot about one-on-one customer relationships or brand relationships at some point. One thing I want to bring up, and that oftentimes there may be more than one stakeholder or decision maker. For instance, in buying a house, a husband or a wife, or a family that chooses, and same thing in construction and some other industries. And I have to tell you, in the case when there's multiple decision makers or stakeholders, we need to do that trust, relational, safe, ideas, and listen to all of those stakeholders. And you actually want to probably even be more diligent about writing, what are the top concerns or the top needs of each one of those stakeholders, so you can come up with a balanced approach. And in the case that you have a very large community of people making a decision, like in a business to business or a business to government scenario, I think that one of the recommendations I would make for somebody is to seek coaches within that community. And what I mean by that is purposely have a trusted, deep relationship with one or two of the people in that community that can help you understand the social dynamics and the emotions and issues of different stakeholders, so you have a chance to address them.
So that you can better connect with them. I agree with you. Well said, George. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think I'm good. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. I think these were two really interesting podcasts. I hope the listeners do find them interesting as well. We covered motivation at a personal level, internally in a company, and externally with the client and the customer. And like you said, let's kind of like transition from here into talking about the art of delegation. We'll talk about the different types of delegation, how to delegate, the challenges, the do's and don'ts, and we'll save that for our next discussion. You're good with that, George?
I think that's fantastic. Next time, let's talk about delegation. I think that's perfect. So thank you all for listening to this episode of Back to Basics on the Business Edge, brought to you by Feliciano School of Business at Montclair State University. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we welcome any feedback you have for us, including suggestions for future topics.
Thank you, George. See you next time on Back to Basics podcast.
Excellent. See you next time.